Hello and welcome. Another episode. We have a double guest week this week. Today, continuing on the track of DevOps, with us today, Bryan Finster. Adrian,
Hey.
Bryan, hello.
How's it going?
Hello.
I don't think Bryan needs introductions, but those, at least for the minority of our live participants that may want to know a little bit more about you, Bryan, or perhaps about you yourself, Adrian. Why don't we start off with a little bit of an introduction?
Yes, I'm Bryan Finster. I'm an engineer at Defense Unicorns. We solve really hard delivery problems. Things like how do you deliver software? How do you do CD to a submarine? Secure environments, that sort of thing. Before that, I worked for Walmart for a whole bunch of years. First in supply chain, later on in platform, and then started up the DevOps Dojo at Walmart because we were, how do we show teams how to do continuous delivery, like hands-on in their environment. So I'm really passionate about continuous delivery because when we piloted CD, I've discovered that development didn't have to be pain. Mm-hmm. It was like for the first time, development wasn't painful.
Adrian, a quick intro from you.
Yes, Adrian. I hope you know me from yesterday. I'm a small business CTO talking about things, similar things like DevOps, continuous delivery, a lot about culture. So I'm always interested in getting some value out of your company. Not out of your company, but it is important for me that a company focuses on the right things, especially when it's tech driven. And this is what I'm talking about mostly. So I'm always trying to connect the business with the tech, and not too deep into tech, not too deep into business, but bridging the gap. So this is basically what I do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. And I'm Denis. I'm combining traditional life coaching with technologists. So sometimes they say I'm a walking bullshit detector. And what I like to do well is sort of combine the complex fields in software delivery and software engineering, software production. Usually that's leadership, architecture, and the let's say the human qualities, the human competencies that go with it. Today's topic is based on an article that Bryan wrote in a series called 5-Minute DevOps. Those of you who are with us live and would like to read it while we're discussing it, here's a quick link for it. And I believe my technology does not allow me to post on LinkedIn, so I'll post that twice. Apologies, YouTube viewers. I think you'll get this link twice. But there's the link if you want to open it and follow it in the background. Today's topic is sort of handling a much more narrower problem than yesterday. Yesterday, we were sort of discussing continuous delivery as a whole, and we had Tobias on to discuss matters of coaching and sort of digital transformation from a leadership perspective as a whole. What does a team need to deliver? Does a team struggle with producing software? Does a team struggle with delivering software? Is it somewhere in between? Is there some issue that we're ignoring? Today, it seems we'll have a much more business and delivery-oriented discussion.
I mean, maybe. I think this is the why behind continuous delivery.
The why behind continuous delivery. I think that's a good synopsis for today's episode.
Yeah, because people want to transform, but why? And people want to do agile, but why? I mean, this is what's the fundamental problem we're trying to solve is really the thrust I was trying to get across with this. So how do you want to go about it?
Well, I can read out the 3 wrongs real quick. You mentioned in the article, number 1, the idea is wrong. Number 2, we'll misunderstand during the development. And number 3, the user's needs change before we deliver. And this sounds very lean to me. This sounds like very, very lean.
And I bet many people can already identify with at least 2 of those 3 points. Let's say align them to their pain points, which they already have. And if they don't be able to do that, they will be after the show, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, the personal journey I went on, because I grew up a traditional software developer. I mean, I've been doing this for almost 30 years now, is that you get requirements. Or actually, my first job, this was wonderful because in the early '90s, except tooling, we were DevOps. I would call I would talk to my customer who would be who wanted modifications to our core system. I would gather requirements from them. I'd put together quick, hey, it's going to take 2 or 3 days to put this together. I'd demo it to them after I got it done. I'd install it. I'd make all the database changes. It was just me, and just I got to deliver fast. It was awesome. And then I moved to an organization where I got to deliver once a quarter, and it just sucked the life out of me. And with like waterfall process, like really, like they sent us through PMI training, like the real thing, right? And then they brought in Agile. And it was just the same thing in 2 week sprints. But the mindset was always that we just need to deliver this thing.
Yeah.
And when we started trying to implement continuous delivery for the first time, I started realizing that all these habits I had were wrong. And that the only way we were going to get less wrong was just admit that things were wrong.
Yeah.
And then just iterate rapidly and find out how to become less wrong. And then finally, I started realizing that everything we do is probably wrong. And that was the epiphany that allowed me to just really accelerate my learning, because then I was no longer tied to what I was thinking. I was like, well, what I'm thinking is probably wrong. We're just going to test it and find out. And ultimately, once I got back to where we could deliver very frequently, you finally got back to getting real customer feedback, in the time frame that mattered. And you start understanding, it's like, oh, look, these requirements were actually the defect. It wasn't just that we had bugs. It was just the requirements were the defect. Or they came so long, they were written 9 months ago, and now they're no longer relevant, but we're building them anyway.
That's a problem that's so elusive, even to engineers. That backlog items, that things that you plan to do at some point in the future, they spoil. They have a shelf life. If you write them down when there is market demand, the market demand might disappear by the time you actually decide to do it. Never mind actually deliver it. Or the worst thing is where there's market demand for 1 iteration, but in 2 iterations to actually act on any kind of feedback is too late. And that's the worst. And that's usually what's happening right now for Black Friday and for any kind.
Well, and the problem we have, you see all these things that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Things like we're going to go into PI planning and we're going to go plan what we're going to deliver for the next 3 months.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're supposed to deliver one thing and then get feedback from it to find out if that's really what we want or not. I mean, you're the ultimate
when you
goal
say
we're trying
one
to
thing,
do.
when you say one thing, that can quickly be misconstrued. Sort of, what does one thing mean, and how do we even have this conversation?
Well, there's 2 kinds of one thing. Number one, there's the engineering feedback, right?
Okay.
I'm going to deliver this change today to find out if it breaks anything. Right? And then there's the business feedback. I'm going to deliver the smallest slice of this next feature to find out if it's valuable and deliver that and get feedback. But
figure out if it's safe to merge and whether it's safe to continue with these requirements.
Yeah.
That's
just because it passes all the tests doesn't mean that it doesn't break something in production once it finally gets to a production environment. So I try to have a high level of confidence, but we're never 100% sure.
Yeah.
And so we want to get feedback as rapidly as possible on the engineering thing. And people tell me there's no value in delivering anything until it's feature complete. No. I know it's stable.
Yeah.
That's very valuable. And then the other part is I want to make sure we're on the right track. I don't want to invest too much money in this idea. I don't want to assume my idea is correct. I want to assume my idea is incorrect. It's a scientific experiment. I'm trying to invalidate the hypothesis. And we should be ecstatic when it's successful and just accept when it's not. And then how do we change course to chase the value instead of just assuming about it?
I would like to add something to the term of confidence. I think confidence doesn't mean that you are 100%, as you said, 100% safe to deploy. It's about to be confident that you can handle a situation even if something happened, but you expect that feedback happen at minimum. So what you definitely get is feedback. And if the feedback is a negative, you can react quickly on that. So this is confidence. It's not about, I'm 100% sure that nothing will happen. I think this is a big misconception.
No, I agree. And the thing that people focus on, they focus on the wrong thing. It's, I want to make sure that everything is perfect before we deliver. And that's the wrong thing. Now, I worked in supply chain. Walmart wasn't my first job, but I worked in supply chain at Walmart for a long time. 24/7 support. If I push something to production, number one, for a long time, it wasn't going to go for 3 months. But then when it did go, we were awake a lot at night. Yeah. But I carried a pager for 20 years. And so operation, and for a lot of that time, I was frontline support. So operations is near and dear to my heart. For me, continuous delivery is the ability to repair production very, very fast, right? And what you should be focusing on is number one, how can I ensure that I have the ability to repair any problem quickly, including the last delivery? Because it's not always the last delivery that breaks. It's usually not, typically, honestly. And with that, I now have the ability to run experiments and deliver very small things. And in fact, I should be delivering very small things all the time to validate my ability to repair production. I can't just assume, I have a pipeline, I can fix production. I have to constantly test my pipeline to make sure I can fix production. And I come from that ops mindset because of just too many sleepless nights.
So basically, the pager was the reason why you went into continuous delivery.
No, actually it wasn't. I just wrote an article for InfoQ about this, and the reason we went to continuous delivery was a business problem.
Yeah.
If your lead time is 12 months and you're delivering every quarter, how do you meet business goals in a rapidly changing market, especially when now you have Amazon trying to eat your lunch? And we had, this was awesome. This is what I call real leadership. We had an SVP come to us, the engineers, and say, I need you to figure out how you can deliver what we're doing today every 2 weeks instead of every quarter. And we're talking about a 25 million line, massively entangled monolithic system that's evolved over the last 25 years. I need that every 2 weeks. And then he gave us the runway to figure it out and the air cover to accomplish what we needed to do to get it done. He didn't know how to do it. He told us to go figure it out and then supported our decisions. So it was absolutely a business problem. I'll say that we thought that every 2 weeks was not aggressive enough. And so we started from day one with, we need to go daily or it's not CD. We actually had a project manager assigned to this. He quit the project because he said they said every 2 weeks and we didn't want to do that. We've been doing this software stuff for a while. We don't actually need you. So we just took it forward.
So for those of you who are, I think it's now picking up. We got quite a few. We are getting very close to our record of live viewers.
No, we are already.
We are?
Yeah, especially on YouTube today.
We have a lot of YouTube viewers today.
It's the largest amount of YouTube viewers we ever had. Because
so Ryan, Mike, Saddam, Zahidul, I saw Angel. Yeah, Angel, hello. And Camila, of course, and Jose. Thank you all for joining us. A quick question to chat. How long does it take you on average to verify your requirements? Like when you write them down and you start working on something, how long does it take for you to figure out whether it was the right thing to work on? What does it look like for you in your company? If you could comment on that, if you have any kind of insights on what was said so far, do let us know. We will respond to chat as much as we can. Usually we get swamped. And today
feel free to put some comments, even in YouTube, either in YouTube or LinkedIn. We will display it and discuss it.
Yeah, we'll display it and discuss it. We see both of them.
You
mentioned.
Well, I want to cover one thing real quick because Mike Price said the requirements are anti-pattern. It should have something like user stories.
Well, let's put it on screen. just give me a moment. I'll read it out for those of our listeners who don't see the screen. So Mike Price is asking, quote requirements unquote are an anti-pattern in my humble opinion. What we want are something closer to user stories. For example, who, what, why, and acceptance criteria, all from the user's perspective. So this is a very sort of traditional, I would say, Scrum or certified Agile view.
So there's 2 points. I don't disagree. You should have all those things. Ultimately, you come down with things we need to implement.
Mm-hmm.
To do that, I call them requirements. User stories, if they're done correctly, should lead to requirements that will be implemented so we can get feedback on the user story.
Mm-hmm.
Usually what happens is user story is actually just requirements that somebody hands to the team.
I like that distinction because you said ideally user stories lead to requirements. It's how I find it as well. You know, I usually when I coach teams, I tell them go talk to someone and log what you talked about in the user story, and then create requirements out of those, like subtasks. If you're,
for me, Nirvana is that the acceptance tests that are next to the user story are the requirements. That we implement those acceptance tests, the test pass, we've met the spec. Now we can find out one test at a time if the spec was actually true or not.
Mm-hmm. I think that requirements change quite often, while you have non-functional requirements which change not so often, and especially your context just change very slowly. And I think those 3 things together are determining what you actually want to do. So this is basically how I see it. So requirements, and this is what I saw very often, even this year, is especially when you work with product owners from external companies, working with other companies, requirements can be, let's say, first of all, you understand them entirely different than the product owner did. And while you're developing already, they change already, which is one of the wrongs we will discuss today. And this leads to a big problem. So most of the times the qualities don't change that fast, but the requirements do, because the requirements are things you can actually touch. It feels like, it's in theory understandable for everyone, but everyone understands a different thing. So this is, I think, the reason why it changes so fast.
Well, can I jump ahead to the user's needs change? I just had a 2-year project end in my house where we had a new deck put on. We extended the roof out over the deck. And I'm now sitting in a sunroom below the deck. The requirements for the project do not reflect the outcome that we have today. What happened was, as things progressed, we saw potential, and then we started chasing the value of that potential. And we had a contractor who believed in single piece flow. He would only go after one job at a time, and worked with us on chasing the value that we saw. Because where I'm sitting right now is originally just supposed to be a screened-in porch. I couldn't have sat out here today because it's cold and rainy. But now I have an entirely new living space because we were chasing the value we saw as things were delivered. And so it's the same with software. People don't actually know what they need until you deliver, and they go, "Oh no, it wasn't quite that."
But there is some humility, Bryan. If you don't mind me mentioning this, you said at the very beginning of our show that you're an engineer, but I would say you're very soft-spoken, very charismatic, and very entrepreneurial, if you don't mind me sort of labeling you that way. Which it seems to be a very unusual and sort of unique and very helpful mix for an engineer.
Well, I think every software engineer should be a business expert. I mean, this is something I've had people who claim to be senior engineers say that their job is algorithms and data structures. Yeah, I mean, you're entry level. I'm sorry. I don't care how well you can code or entry level. If we don't understand deeply the business problem we're trying to solve, we're ineffective as software engineers.
Agreed.
It's like telling somebody that you're a civil engineer because you understand how concrete works, but you don't understand the problem of crossing a river.
How do you approach that from a perspective of just cultivating culture? So cultivating culture. That's a tongue twister.
It's correct, actually.
If I look at it purely from like a pragmatic standpoint, I see a lot of, let's say, engineering managers wanting to hire engineers. They give them career paths which improve their programming skill and sort of, let's say, the communication skills. Not so much, okay, here I'm going to sit you down with the CEO and sort of explain the business from your front to back. Like this latter scenario is 1 in 10,000.
I mean, it should be organic to the work. I'll just give an example. The very first team that we were trying to figure out how to do continuous delivery for the very first time, and we were working on a warehouse management system, and I had been in that problem space for a number of years. In fact, I was teaching the product owners some of the subtleties of warehouse management flow while we were working on a new system, a new application for receiving. But whenever we would, honestly, to get to where you're able to do continuous delivery, I'm going to back up a little bit. If you need to do continuous delivery, you have to be able to do CI. To do CI, you have to have a high level of certainty of how we're going to test the thing we're coding. To do that, we have to have very clear requirements, which meant that we had to go and learn behavior-driven development, the real thing, not, hey, we're coding and testing Cucumber.
Not Cucumber syntax, yeah.
Right. No, it's where we are working with the business to pull together, okay, how should this actually behave and why? Right? And then whenever we were refining our work, I would educate the people who were new to the problem space on the problem we're actually trying to solve. We'd go on distribution center tours, and when we were just going through the tour, I'd point out different terms so they could have a mental model of the thing that they were programming. It's just pushing out, if you don't understand this business problem, we're not going to make those micro decisions that we need to make. We can't always be staring at the product owner and asking just small questions that we should understand just because we understand the environment we're supposed to be developing solutions for. Yeah. It's just how I grew up as a developer. I've always been in that problem space because I started off with, I was the BA. I was the DBA. Yeah, it's just how I grew up.
What I hear very often, and there I would have a question to you, Bryan, is when companies complain that they basically want to create a product, but they don't have an internal team, or the team is very far away from them. Yeah. So there's a huge gap, and they basically say, let's say the IT is not understanding me. The IT is telling, they don't know how to explain their requirements, and as soon as you deliver something, it's somehow wrong. How would you say, what are the best steps you can do in such an environment to get that onto an acceptable level, actually? So how would you solve this problem?
I mean, I think if I can't buy the solution and I can't afford to hire a development team, that's like the worst possible place that you can be in. Yeah. Right? Because, as I've gone through this journey I've been on for, about a decade now, I've come to understand that what we're trying to solve is supply chain of information. And every time you make that hop, right? Every time you have any kind of handoff, you're degrading that supply chain. You're making information fidelity lower. And
again, that tidbits from, we had a question on this from Ryan Savage. What was the book that he held up, Denis? It's called Implementing Lean Software Development by Mary and Tom Poppendek. They mentioned the research specifically is that every time information is being handed off, so I to gather information, I give it to you, I think 75% of that information is lost, or something in that range. So this is then a sort of power law distribution on the actual person down the line. If this takes about 4 to 5 hops, only 1 to 2% of the actual important information makes it to the person who's actually developing the software.
The best idea I have for that, because it's a terrible position to be in, right? Yeah. You can't just say, "Oh, that sucks." Hire an engineering team.
And not only does it suck, but the person who is experiencing the suck is helpless to do something about it because the problem happened way in the beginning of the value stream or the production stream.
There's two things I would do personally if it was my money. Okay, one is I would hire a senior engineer, and then the other engineers that don't work for my company, I would form them as a team around that senior engineer and make sure the contract was written that way.
Mm-hmm.
I would make sure that we were implementing continuous delivery so we can get rapid feedback to the business about whether we're delivering the right things.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd have that senior engineer next to me, next to the business, who's acting as the tech lead for that team. And then I would form a team around them with whoever we could get. And I'd try to make sure that we had competent people, not just whoever, it's like, consulting company X throws a bunch of juniors at us and says, "Here you go. Good luck."
Mm-hmm.
And we're only going to do turnkey development. I'd make sure I had a contract favorable to the business.
So what you just described is very vertical. And I know this is a very complex topic where even things like DevOps are like it's a very broadly misused term. I would like here to sort of use the terminology from the book Accelerate. We are reading it right now in the book club. We're meeting in an hour and a half.
I've had to read it a few times.
Yeah, so chapter 16 in Accelerate really describes. So there's a bank in the Netherlands. And they sort of their post-transformation structure looked something along the lines of they have tribes, squads, and chapters.
Spotify.
And I think it is clumsily attributed to Spotify because I don't think Spotify uses this.
No, that's the Spotify. I'm sorry, the Spotify model, not what Spotify actually does.
Yes, it's called the Spotify model, even though Spotify doesn't use it. But my point is that the interesting bit that that usually shocks engineering managers, or that usually shocks non-technical managers or leaders, is that the tribes themselves are vertical, right? So a squad is something that is a handful of people and is following a value stream. And then a tribe is a team of those teams that will have a tribe leader. But those are all mixed teams. And then what chapters capture a specialization in the organization. So it's all BAs, it's all engineers, it's all designers, it's all. And what I see when we use the terminology siloed companies, we say that the teams match the chapters.
Yeah.
Where engineers are a team, designers are a team, product owners are a team, and then the senior leadership is a team. And then that's sort of completely dysfunctional because there is no talk of product, there's no talk of streams, there's no talk of actually autonomous sort of self-steering, self-orienting teams. It's just about, I have this large of a pipeline that makes decisions, and I have a completely different shaped and sized pipeline that executes decisions, and a completely differently sized, shaped, and sort of steered machine that gathers requirements and user feedback. And then trying to make that work is a fool's errand. Like that's just not gonna work.
It's dumb. It's optimizing for HR. It's done.
It's optimizing for HR.
Just hire a Scrum Master.
Exactly. But my but my point is, a lot of business leaders don't seem to be aware that they don't even have teams. So what you described that you would do naturally, you immediately went to shaping a team that is vertical. It's like, we have this problem here. We're probably in this IT area or in this product area, and we need
a product team. We need a product team. Exactly. We're building a product. We need a product team. And that was the other thing that I talked about in the FAQ article, was that when we started this, hey, we need to do CD thing, we were organized into feature teams. So you had long-lived teams, but they were just handed random features to go and implement across this giant system, which meant that every time you touched code, somebody else had changed it, and you had no idea how or why or what they were trying to do. It's just yeah. And as part of that goal that that Randy, our SVP, gave us. We went off as a bunch of the senior engineers who had a lot deep business knowledge, and went and whiteboarded out what the product subdomain should be for the warehouse management system. Came back to Randy and said, "This is our team structure. Here's how they will communicate to each other through interfaces. We need teams to look like this." Mm-hmm. And then we started building teams that looked like that. We built real product teams, including, by the way, a very small platform team to template Jenkins to make it very easy for each one of the teams to stand up new pipelines for the new things we're building to strangle out the old system.
That sounds like once you had the topology right, you even predicted that there would be a pattern of repeated work, and you sort of...
Well, and also we got it wrong. There were some things where you had to tweak some of the subdomains, right?
To have exceptions in the actual platform.
Well, it's like this subdomain was too big. We needed to split it.
Yeah.
That sort of thing, right? And the lesson I learned from that was it's how important it is, even if you're broken down that small, to make sure that you have very modular software. Because
you don't want to build a general purpose framework as an output of your platform. We have a few questions, Brian, if you don't mind us focusing on that.
Sure.
One of them is from Ryan Savage. Had a TPM, so that would be a technical project manager, program manager?
Technical product manager. So Ryan and I used to be teammates in Walmart platform.
I see. So Ryan asks, had a TPM ask me what she could do to start learning to be more technical and learn to code. I suggested her books on continuous delivery and the principles of flow. I said it would help more than learning to code. This distinction of flow and continuous delivery versus coding, so the actual programming skill versus the engineering of delivery, where do you stand on this? Like for just career growth, let's say, for somebody who's like aiming for a proper senior level.
If your goal is, I think the learning curve, there's not a lot of good information to jump you from basic hello world to what I need to do for continuous integration that you can do quickly. I mean, I think the learning curve to CI without trying to learn it on your own is pretty steep. Personally, I think that's something that you really need to experience.
It's also hard to do alone, because alone you won't have it. It requires the problems that only a team experiences.
Right, because otherwise, alone it's continuous isolation.
Exactly. Yeah, you have nobody else to integrate, nobody else's work and feedback to integrate with. So it sort of cannot be learned in isolation.
Yeah, and because you can't experience it in isolation, you can't be self-taught. You don't feel the problems.
It's like dance. It's like couples dancing. Like you need to dance with a partner. You can't just learn the moves.
Yeah, you can't watch a YouTube video and stand in your living room and learn how to dance.
Would you say you can only learn that by pain?
Unfortunately, I think that you only learn it by pain. Or like in Ryan's case, Ryan was when he joined Walmart platform, he came straight out of college, and we were hardcore CD, so he learned that from the ground up. So he didn't go. He's going through some of the pain now, but but he didn't have the pain back then because we were mentoring him.
So interesting. I think when we take a look in our past, so we are all a little bit older, let's say. In the times when we deployed via and running automatic hot folder FTP, maybe those early stages, that was a form of continuous delivery. Yes, it was.
Yeah, it was.
And I think it's interesting that when I started with my career, we basically were closer to continuous delivery than in the let's say in the middle part of my career, where this Git comes into play everywhere. So we went from SVN to Git, and then everybody was into this Git flow idea and hiding in isolation features and all this kind of stuff. So you actually had great large teams especially, a lot of large teams working, each of them in isolation, and try to get out a common singular aggregated product, which most of the time failed, And I think, I don't know exactly what I wanted to say by that, but I think it's interesting that we have the shift in the past, let's say 2 decades ago, we were closer to continuous delivery than most company I work with today. So most companies I work with are still not doing continuous delivery. We had several polls on LinkedIn about that for other streams, I think 3 weeks ago, and most don't do continuous delivery.
Yeah, and I think it's the thing that I experienced. So in the dojo, we got to see, we worked directly with teams. It wasn't like the normal coaching thing where you kind of drive by and say, "Oh, you should fix this." We were hands-on pairing with teams for 6 weeks at a time. And fundamentally, what it comes down to is I've never seen good, so I can't imagine what good looks like. And I can't imagine what you're telling me will work. And what we're doing right now is working. Well, I mean, sure. I mean, I can push a car someplace and the car will arrive there, but it's not awesome. I'd much rather drive the car. I mean, it's a better way to get things done. But if all you've ever learned was, I need to just push this car, and you can't imagine anything better. It's fundamentally, that's what it comes down to, is just the haven't been exposed to what really good looks like. And if you've been doing this for a while, or all you've been exposed to is what really good looks like, it's like you just, I talk to people and I sometimes forget their context. That they're just living in pain and they don't know any better. And I've not been living in pain. I refuse to go back. And then there's that bridge where we just talk past each other because of that pain gap.
And pain, what I experience often is not only just that you don't like the way you program code, the code base, those technical operational things. Oftentimes pain is stress within the company. So when the tension between business and tech is getting,
lose confidence in each other's.
It's death marches with too much tech debt. It's support calls based off of things that, I didn't mean it to work this way, but you're going to wake up in the middle of the night and fix it, even though that's what the requirements said. It's the uncertainty, the stress, the fear of delivery.
Fear of delivery is quite common.
Anxiety.
I mean, it's just constant stress and pain. I thought that was normal. And this is the reason why I'm so just vocal about this topic, is because if we fix these problems, we don't have to live in pain anymore. It's just a more humane way to work. It's better for the business. It's better for the company's bottom line. It's better for our quality of life. It's better for everyone. But people push for behaviors that hurt that goal. Which annoys me. Which is, you'll see me on LinkedIn sometimes being very aggressive because they're annoying me by pushing things that harm developers, harm businesses, but it's all that they know. We put together minimumcd.org as a conference project at DevOps Enterprise Summit a few years ago, just as a list of problems. Solve these problems and your organization will be a better place to work.
I have
the whole DORA metrics and the accelerate movement is sort of following in similar footsteps.
I just wanted to continue on what Bryan just said. I have that very often as well, when I especially see on LinkedIn discussions going on, which are totally focused on only operational problems, completely ignoring business problems, and the results of that, like a toxic culture, stress, layoffs, all this kind of stuff, are people somehow don't view that as their problems. It's only like everyone is trying to see the problems within tech, but we are a team, we are business. So every software developer isn't a business person.
I remember I'd have teams come in and ask me for advice with dealing with, their business customer. The business customer says this, and business customer is demanding that. And I told them, I was like, look, you're in a bad position technically. Your business customer, I'd like take my badge off and throw it on the table and say, their badge is the same color as my badge. We succeed or fail together. So we either bring them together on board and explain to them the challenges and work together, or everything's going to fail, and they're going to fail. And so if they're blaming you for it, you should explain to them that they're part of that failure.
Camilla had a comment on this regarding requirements changing, and we also had a follow-up from James. Just going to put it on screen quickly to read it. Camilla says, I do think there is a difference between a set of requirements that have to be expanded due to new ideas, etc., and a product owner not really knowing what they want. Because implementing more features or solving a problem in a more effective way is something everyone wants. But as an engineer, not knowing if the feature I'm building today will be tossed out tomorrow due to lack of communication from the PO is super demotivating.
Yeah, I think there's three kinds of. I'm only going to say three. There's probably more, but there's three kinds of requirements changing problems. One is what people erroneously call scope creep. There's no such thing as scope creep in product development. There's just the next feature request. That's all it is. The other one is that's not quite what I needed, not quite what I meant. Either I didn't understand what I really needed before it was delivered, or that wasn't quite what I meant. You misunderstood, which is
that's detail oriented.
Well, no, it's just like it doesn't feel quite right. It would be if we tweaked it, it would be slightly better, that sort of thing. Right?
Yeah.
And the other one is we delivered a feature that was a brilliant idea that no one's using. Because they don't need it anymore, or we completely missed the mark on the understanding, but we built it anyway. Yeah, and now we're supporting it and operating it, and no one's using it.
So on that mark, you mentioned earlier behavior-driven development to sort of, I think, solve this problem, right? So this is a silo problem where the wrong people are putting together the requirements in isolation, too far in advance, not getting feedback.
You've got a PMO generating requirements, throwing it over the wall to a development team and saying, go implement this.
And they're not a subject matter expert, and then they're blocking the engineering team from becoming subject matter experts, and then nobody really understands the business.
Not only that, but if you have questions, there's a long wait time to get answers. There's all sorts of dysfunction. I saw the stupidest thing ever on LinkedIn today, which was a SaaS founder and CTO saying that, hey, you know what? You're probably bad at writing requirements, so just record a 5-minute video and hand it to the team. Like, this is the worst kind of dumb on so many levels. I don't get to ask questions. You don't even have the common courtesy to talk to me. There's no back and forth at all. It's just like, hey, do what I say, and I'm going to go.
Exactly. This is still an imperative. And the idea of a feedback cycle, and this is important for everyone, is about the cycle. So you do that over and over again so that the developers become aware of what the end users say to whatever stakeholders. And this is basically a circle. So the developer is aware of at least most of the feedback around there. So the developer knows the product to be able to while delivering already. Let's say a developer should be able to make changes to the requirements while developing in own responsibility. This is somewhat important. And if you cannot do this, you basically don't have that kind of, let's say, culture and idea in place. And this is, I think, the real problem, especially what Camilla just said, is that is basically this rigid system of having someone giving you orders, half-baked orders. You bake them, and you never executing. You never know what happens with those things.
You as an engineer are executing their exploratory process. Like, they don't know, so you need to implement something so that they figure it out. But you should be the one figuring it out, being guided by their sort of prioritization process, because they know more details.
It's shocking, but people need to understand that it's possible that really smart people who are paid to solve problems, once they understand the actual problem and your product vision, might have ideas on how to solve that problem even better.
Yeah.
That one person coming up with ideas is so much stupider than a group of people saying, hey, what are some good ideas?
That's a great way of putting it.
It's waste brain power.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not really leveraging, who was it? I think Alex Hormozy was talking about some story from his dad. One of his quotes that his dad used to tell him is like, you have a brain and 2 hands, use them. And the way that most, let's say, dysfunctional product engineering teams or just engineering departments or engineering cultures are set up is that the brain is in one department and the hands are in the other department. And then they need to have meetings to sort of put them on the same body. Because it's just completely disconnected. The thinking of should we be doing this happens outside of what the hands are doing. And then you have to have this like weird remote controlled Robot simulation.
Well, and going back to the idea of the supply chain information, right? And the question you asked Adrian earlier about the remote team, we had an issue once where the team I was working on was about 40% contract, but they were staff augment in place in this team area. We had team areas where we were all, it was open space for that team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Information radiators, all the stuff that you would need to go really fast. Well, HR came down and said, well, for legal reasons, we can't have them have assigned seating. Because if you have assigned seating, suddenly you have contractors being treated like employees, and then it causes all sorts of legal nightmares for the US, right? And so they took all of the contract workers and put them in hotel seating away from the team area. Our ability to deliver immediately collapsed because 40% of our team was somewhere else. They would miss ad hoc meetings. We couldn't find them because it was hotel seating. We didn't know where they sat from day to day to day. And I finally went to our senior director and said, if you want us to actually deliver the way we were delivering, I need those people back, because just that distance within the same building where, they were only probably 100 feet away, but it was still that 100 feet truncated the communication supply chain, created a handoff, created all sorts of disruption. And my senior director went to bat for us and got them back in our area. They just couldn't have assigned seating, so we put them in a hoteling in the center of our team area.
Fair.
Right? But you have to fight for the right sort of structure if you want to deliver well, if you want to fight for your team.
The communication flow. So the problem was communication flow. The
communication flow, and it was second-class citizens. Suddenly they are less than.
Employees and employees as contractors, and sort of kind of not really employees as not contractors.
Now, I gave a talk in 2017 with a teammate about this experience of what CD, what the outcomes of actually driving towards CD. Right? And at the end of it, somebody asked me what percentage of our team was contractors. I said, it doesn't matter. I said, you either treat them like employees and treat them like real people, or just get rid of them, because you can't deliver well.
So James has a comment.
Go ahead.
We have like 10 comments piling up, and it's mostly James sort of having a conversation with Bryan. I would like to catch up with him to give him a chance, because he's been shooting some really good feedback. So James says, yes, on BDD, the real thing. One of the best practices we developed early on at IMView, the first lean startup, was a close connection, open communication among product engineering and the QA team. The outcome was, I think, what you describe as the real thing. And he has a follow-up, which is exactly what you just spoke about, is this idea that more specifically, we had frequent face-to-face meetings along with some documentation, enough to ensure a shared understanding of requirements to inform both automated and manual testing efforts. The QA team member was a team leader on our product development teams, along with product and engineering, given that roles unique familiarity with actual customer usage of the product. This is, I think, Bryan, what you mentioned as being the number 2 in your 3 rungs. So you'll misunderstand during development.
Yeah, and this is exactly what we did. When we started on this journey, every team had an offshore testing team. There was just test automators. That was a complete nightmare when you try to go to CD, because their tests were always trailing. So I worked with the QE department to get a QE lead, as she wasn't full time.
QE being quality engineering.
They called it quality engineering.
Yeah. Okay.
To get a QE lead, as she wasn't full time, but she was at every single one of our meetings when we were going through refining with BDD, and working with her as a liaison, because we were changing the paradigm about how testing was done.
Yeah.
And I finally got them to remove that testing team from our team, because all they were doing was creating really poor tests that weren't doing anything to help us. And I mean, we had to start from zero. We didn't know how to test when we started. But I mean, a year later, we were testing way better than they were. to the point where we could go to production multiple times a day with high levels of confidence.
Yeah.
But who is the first QA person? Is it the developer or someone else in the team? So when it comes to making sure that the quality is actually met, so how would you say who is the first responsible person for that?
I mean, ultimately, it's the quality starts at defining how we're going to test it before we start coding. Something I say repeatedly is, if we don't know how to test it, we shouldn't start coding it.
Yeah.
We define how we're going to test it. If you go to dojoconsortium.com, .org, there's a whole bunch of playbooks out there that I got open source before I left Walmart platform from the Walmart Dojo. And one of the things we talk about there is code review. And if you're doing code review, what you should be looking for is, are we testing it the way we said we were going to test it when we refined the story, and is it readable? Right? It's like variable names make sense. Is it clean? Is it modular? Is it simple? But focus on the tests. And so, whose responsibility is it? It's the team's responsibility to identify, and the team is all the developers, your testing lead, the person who enables people to test better, not the person who does testing. QA should not test. They should enable people to test better, right? And the product owner, all working together, that's the team. They're responsible for the tests. Implementation is done by the developer, and the pipeline is responsible for validating that the tests ran.
Mm-hmm. But that's quickly getting you into trouble, because in a lot of teams that I'm coaching, QA is usually an HR problem to writing tests, not to make the tests easier to make and easier to run, but to cover for this lack of automation, that the QA engineer is then the person who is essentially doing heroics just before deployment.
And they're actually making it worse as they go.
And they're making it worse because they're blocking feedback. Because
it was super common.
If I had high confidence that it is benign, I could just push it out to production and get feedback. But instead, there's now this labor going on during the deployment cycle.
Yeah. So every time we would work with the team in the dojo, number one, we're with you for 6 weeks, and you'd be doing 2 sprints a week. So every 2.5 days, we're delivering, and early on doing a retro about what broke that prevented us from delivering. So that's item number one. When we go into a team and they would have a test automator, usually using Cucumber to write end-to-end tests, but they'd have a test automator. The first thing we do is like, hey, look, you're no longer the test automator. You, and whether it was true or not, whether they were trained in it or not, we just granted them respect, right? It's like, you are the quality expert. You need to help the developers learn how to test, because they are now going to be doing CI, which means they can't push untested code. Just flat up stop. You're no longer allowed to push code that's not tested. They're not good at it yet, which means that you're going to have to help them. We're going to help everybody, but that's your job to make sure they are testing correctly. And that's just how we would do it. We just say, that's it. You're done. Of course, we were internal. We weren't contractors, right? We weren't consultants brought in. We were internal, so we had street cred inside the organization. So people would just like, oh, okay.
How do you approach the sort of litmus test? Let's say you are a consultant and you get brought in. What is, you mentioned earlier, in order to do CD, you need to do CI. In order to do CI, you need to do something along the lines of trunk-based development.
You need very small, for CI, you need very small testable acceptance criteria. Yeah.
Where do you, this is very quickly, in a dysfunctional organization that releases very slowly and chaotically, this can quickly become a chase down the rabbit hole. How do you quickly triage, let's say, if this is going to be a huge cultural shift, how do you approach breaking the problem itself up into smaller units of change?
Oh, that's number one. Is the Does leadership want the team fixed, or their teams fixed, or is the leadership wanting actual change and improvement and willing to give error cover? So the very first thing I do is interview the highest level of error cover that the team can have.
And when you say that, is that painting the idea of wanting it to be fixed a negative connotation? Did I understand that correctly? Yeah. So it's like, do we want to change, or are we like judging them and they need to sort of figure?
Yeah, the team is delivering the best they can possibly deliver in the system they're delivering in. Mm-hmm. Right? The system around them is broken. Okay, they may also lack some skills, but then they don't need those skills because the system around them is broken. Mm-hmm. Honestly, the skills are relatively easy to fix, but you're going to get very limited improvement if you don't have. I mean, you'll get something close to CI maybe if you don't have leadership support, active support, not even just permission, active support that, yes, I want everything to be awesome. And I respect my engineers. I'm going to give them the support they need. Yeah. If you don't have that, just don't get started.
Raul, one of our regulars, has a comment on this from earlier. He said, usually most of the pain comes from top-down decision-making where we have bosses narrow-minded and unwilling to listen.
Yeah, it's the same with the videos you just mentioned before. Don't make imperative videos and orders and, things top down.
It's not a feedback loop. It's just going one way. Like, you can't fix the problem if you can't give feedback, right? If no feedback is being given.
I think I left a comment yesterday on a similar conversation where I said, if you work for someone who doesn't want to listen to you and you know it's a better way of working, go find a smarter place to work. Mm-hmm. I mean, how much pain are you willing to tolerate?
Mm-hmm. It will be, if you're just an engineer, it will be damaging to your career. Because you'll be learning bad habits and you'll be reinforcing them. And you'll reinforce your environment, your peers to follow them.
You won't learn as you could be learning. It's like when you never get feedback, you're just let's say a robot. You're just doing stuff as someone else supposes it to do for you, actually. So you don't make decisions. What you should do as a developer, you develop, which is an active process. It's not like you are not an automation unit, it's not like this. And
ultimately, as a software engineer, you're only as smart as the problems you've been allowed to solve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. I've been very fortunate about, number one, the problems that I've had presented to me and the leadership I've had when I had those problems. I've been given really hard problems to solve with really crappy leadership, and the outcomes were poor. Mm-hmm. You really need both of those things. And if you work in an organization where you have boring problems or bad leadership, either one of those things I think is a deal killer if you want to be if you want to really take this career seriously.
Yeah, we have this often now on LinkedIn as well with the will AI substitute software developers, and I think this is aligned to this topic very, very close actually, because if you have the feeling that you can be substituted by such a average thing like ChatGPT, then you are actually not really a developer. You don't make decisions, you don't think too much, you don't plan ahead, you don't process feedback, you don't make decisions at all, you just do. And then, maybe you can substitute on some point against some form of low-code thing in the future. But if you do decisions, if you be an active developer, active in shaping the outcome of the company, then you cannot be substituted by any form of AI in the near future. This is my opinion about that.
No, I agree. I've been doing a lot of experiments with ChatGPT from multiple perspectives. Mm-hmm. From a development point of view, it's right now a junior developer that sometimes hallucinates dependencies, but there's potential there. What I see it as a potential is a fifth generation language. Mm-hmm. It's just a next layer of abstraction up. So you don't have to go and code conditionals. You can just tell it what the condition should do. Mm-hmm. But you still have to have the brain power to tell it what to do.
Exactly.
Right? And that comes down to getting down to how do I test it?
Mm-hmm. But it's funny because... Sorry.
I was going to say that the people who win in the AI development point of view are the people who can do behavior-driven development and understand how to think and test.
This whole core notion about behavior-driven development is often being misunderstood.
Yeah.
It's often being misunderstood the same way that you explained earlier that QA is being misunderstood.
Yeah.
The QE might be being misunderstood, and that it is not cohesive. It doesn't teach the developers how to test themselves. It just silos that knowledge and infantilizing them, sort of preventing them from learning that.
It's a typing pool, right? Yeah.
It's a typing pool. Yeah, exactly. And the whole idea, I went on a binge on LNK videos recently because that was exactly the problem we tried to solve with object-oriented sort of paradigms. It's like that was solving the same problem. It's like if you're looking at it purely from like a typing problem, writing an if statement in assembly code might be 4 lines of code. In C, it's 1 or 2, depending on where you put the curly braces. But it's this idea that I'm taking this concept that takes for a human 5 lines to read and reason about, and in this language, which compiles 1-to-1, it is 1 line of code, and that was abstraction. That is the first generation or first to second generation language that abstracts away this idea that there's something a machine does that I know how to express as a single sentence, as a single statement. Right. So, and then we went further from that. It's like, okay, well, there are now these ideas around these statements, which I can introduce I can express as an object, or I can express it as a message. So it is no longer the statement itself, but it might be carrying behavior. It might be carrying stateful behavior. It might be carrying stateless behavior. It might be encapsulating something very important, separating out some kind of cell-like behavior of this is outside, this is inside. But still, it is being expressed as this single statement idea. And then AI is then that extra notion of when I say this prompt, when I use this prompt, I actually meant all that you'll be sort of outputting for me. Now, the problem for me is that it's, using AI right now, it's as if I'm writing C and then compile it. And then I take that assembly code that it's generated and then I put it into my source code. Like that's the problem that I'm seeing with LLMs being used for coding. It's like, well, if I'm
we're still in the early days, right?
Yeah,
I mean, if you because some of my coworkers have done comparisons between like Copilot and ChatGPT, and ChatGPT will give them better results than Copilot just because it's
it's about context. Like it will have less or more.
Yeah. So, but I mean, we could deep dive into this. Ultimately, it doesn't replace real software engineering, right?
Yeah.
It does replace a lot of menial stuff, right? I'm not afraid of being replaced by a large language model. I'm just not. To your point, if you are afraid of being replaced by a large language model, find more interesting problems.
Yeah.
So
I never were a fan of the term engineer. So basically, the term in Germany, we never used this term, to be honest. Not really. So we always use the translation for software developer, and I still like it more because it reflects or describes more the actual doing of creating software. You could do this without any programming language, and you're still a software developer. But the engineering part, or the programmer, or the coder, is for me too much operational. Yes, it's important for us if we do coding, and if we do those hands-on stuff. But
no, I'd say I don't think so. I'm going to strongly disagree.
Okay.
And because for me, an engineer is the person it should be done this way, right? If I'm engineering a bridge, I'm not pouring concrete and laying rebar. I'm saying we need to engineer it this way for these conditions, across this river, across this span, for these weather conditions. I mean, and you have all these trade-offs you're making, right? I mean, that's what real engineering is. And I focus on calling it engineering also because I want us to be held to a higher standard than we are today. There is rigor in real engineering that is lacking in software engineering, even though software engineering is overtaking engineering in importance a lot. The barrier to entry, because the tools have gotten so easy, the barrier to entry into software development is very, very low. So is the rigor. We need more rigor in our industry, and we need to be held to higher professional standards than we are. And that's why I use engineer.
On the topic of professional standards, we have a very good sort of more human management oriented question here from Sophia. Sophia, hello. A new face on the stream. Agree on everything. Unfortunately, I've also seen some developers taking advantage of quote agile unquote to do less, and so we, the rest of the team, have much more work to do. Without individual performance checks, how can we overcome this?
Well, so number one, software is not developed by individuals unless it's something like Lodash, where it's one guy who created this project he likes. Right? It's developed by teams. And I've studied this individual metrics problem for a long time. I talked to Jeremy King when he was CTO of Walmart and had this conversation with him. He's like, yeah, we tried all sorts of things at eBay and all sorts of things, other places. We never found anything that couldn't be gamed. But there's no valid individual metrics you can use for a software development team. There's just not. I'm sorry. You know, what you do though is you give the team hard challenges. You make them, number one, you give them a business problem. You make them own the business problem. You give them ownership of how they deliver the solutions to that problem. And you give them responsibility and accountability to the outcomes of their decisions, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to make really stupid decisions like, you know what, I want to learn Python. Let's write another service in Python so that we have 5 languages in our stack. You're not going to make stupid decisions like that if you also have operational responsibility for what you build. And then you know, and so you're answerable to the business. You are answerable to your engineering decisions, and then you look for very short feedback loops. You can't, you know, I mean, we shouldn't be putting teams on death marches, but there are people who will slack off. There are, so we have goals. We have real business goals we're trying to accomplish, and we can see if we're accomplishing those or not. You can measure our ability to achieve business goals as a team. And if we're not, why not? Are the tools crappy? You know, we start number one with just, it's too hard to deliver. Where's the friction in the system? The last problem is probably going to be slackers. There are slackers in organizations. I'm not Pollyanna about this, but most people aren't. Yeah. It could be they're just demotivated by the sucky system they're delivering it, right? Or like I said, it could just be that it takes, you know, half a day to get a support ticket answered because my laptop's acting up, right?
Yeah.
Or
so
a week.
What I want to add to this one is that the worst outcomes I ever saw every time. So when we created software for others. Software for ourselves, it doesn't matter. When you have this idea of, let's say, isolation or, you know, single persons, you have those people who want to program in their tunnel. They don't want to integrate in the team. They don't want to know about the outcome. And when you have this level of indifference in your team, you are basically doomed to fail in some way or the other, or entirely. So there's basically no way to run a successful product when more than half of the team feels indifference while developing.
Well, and CI is a good counter to this. So the cultural impact, so this is if you go look at the DevOps Enterprise Summit's 27 YouTube channel from the 2017 talk, it's continuous delivery solving the talent problem at Walmart. Okay, and the mic drop, just before the mic drop. The mic drop was really, if you send the team down the path of continuous delivery and then they get cold feet, they're going to keep pushing for it, but maybe not for you. But just before that was the comment that it made us love development again, because it took such a high level of collaboration to do real continuous integration. And we were hardcore about it. Today's code goes to the trunk today. No ifs, ands, or buts. At least once a day, codes go in the trunk today. And the definition of ready for a user story was that we can accomplish this in 2 days or less. Mm-hmm. Either as a group or individually. This story, either as a team or individually, depending on the size of the story, can be accomplished in 2 days or less. And we knew that because we're breaking things down to the level of detail where we could say, this will take us 2 days or less. And that level of detail drove out uncertainty, right? So we had this, virtuous cycle of very small, short feedback loops gave us high levels of certainty and gave us a lot of teamwork required to get it done. People couldn't just sit on something for 2 weeks and not do anything.
It's a great question by Sophia, and she also has a little mini challenge here for you, Bryan.
Yeah.
So you're saying that it might be okay-ish, having some slackers around sometimes? I was hoping
No. The team knows who the slackers are. The team, if the team's trying to achieve goals and there's people holding them back, they will start grumbling about it, right? This is the thing that in Walmart we call coaching by walking around. A good leader will know what's going on with their teams. Exactly. They don't need metrics.
The problem starts from.
Good point.
I see this all the time, and I often encouraging this because I'm usually working with the team and their immediate leader. So, or just a leader that then has second line managers, but it's usually a singular person with their reports. And I see this a lot where they might accidentally have this. They are coming from a benevolent space of wanting to treat everybody equally, but they are doing so from a place where the rules were not clearly communicated. So they are treating the slackers equally as the well-performing members of the team, because maybe they might be at some kind of how would you call it, learning maximum, or like their ability to just sit down and fix interrelational problems is at a capacity. So there is no wiggle room. They didn't leave themselves wiggle room to address the differences in attitudes between those who you might call slackers and those who you might call high performers. And then when the high performers see that they're being treated the same way as the slackers, they start slacking off as a second generation problem of seeing the sort of neglect to their aptitude.
No, this is why I disagree strongly with the idea of, we're just going to have a self-forming team and we're going to bring everybody together and then everybody's going to just work together in harmony and kumbaya and beat the drums around the campfire. You need a tech lead. And the tech lead should be a technical leader. They should be a developer on the team. They should be focusing on how do I clear technical impediments for the team? How do I be looking out for new problems, and how do I make sure that everybody's growing technically on the team, right? They're not the HR person, right? But they're the tech lead. And they're also the person who says, okay, look, I see you're struggling here. How can I help? Okay. Now I'll tell you that on a team I worked on once as the tech lead, had somebody on the team who was relatively junior, and he was struggling. He was always a little slower than even the other junior developers, but my job as a tech lead is to help grow other engineers, right? Ultimately, though, he went on site, and it was an internal customer, but still our customer, and was behaving in ways that showed he just didn't care. And then I found out about this from one of my other teammates who's out there. And then so I started kind of digging in more into his Git log. Only discover he hadn't committed code in a month. He'd just been, because we've been giving him something that was like, he was relatively new to our team. He'd come from another team. Anyway, all that to be said, when I started digging in and looking at the information that's being given to me about things, I rejected his access to Git and told his manager he was fired from the team. I was like, we've done everything we can, but he's dragging us down, causing morale problems on the team. I can't have that. And his manager told me I wasn't allowed to fire him because I didn't have HR authority.
I had exactly the same situation.
I told him, I said, he could sit there all he wants, but he doesn't have access to Git anymore.
Yeah.
And we're going to go forward, and we're not going to give him any work. So you enjoy.
We had this issue once in one of our companies where we grew very rapidly, and as we split in teams, we didn't write down any kind of, let's say, cultural agreements on what the bar should be for hiring somebody for a senior position. So what happened is that then two two different engineering managers in our team. So I was a tech lead on one team, and there was another tech lead, and we sort of disagreed on what the bar should be. And they hired somebody that was below the bar. They said, "This is a senior, trust me." And then their team disbanded, and we absorbed all of their engineers into sort of, then we split and then reintegrated with them, right? So it's like we had a team, they had a team, and sort of we merged, and then we split along the seam where the new pairs would form naturally around new products. And what happened is that we then determined that we now have two different types of senior engineer in the teams. One that was vetted on a, let's say, more rigorous process, and one that was vetted on a more sort of word-to-mouth kind of, well, if they take, it's my responsibility to make sure they're a senior. If they're not a senior, then I'm not doing my best, giving them nurture. But as Anjana points out, Anjana is one of our regulars in the stream as well, is that, yes, you might have high performers and slackers, but the slacker also needs to be interested in learning. Like you can't force them to learn.
No,
it needs to be.
This is not a jobs program, right?
Yeah.
If they're not interested in learning, they need to go somewhere else. I can't, this is the thing, is that to build a high-performing team requires having a whole bunch of people who want to get things done, right? And I don't want you to get the wrong impression. I wasn't like a dictator in the team. I was absolutely, I found it early on, if you want to do CD, you have to be a servant leader. You have to listen to the team and help push, help them clear problems, right? And this was becoming a problem. And so this is just like, okay, guys, I'm sorry, I'll take care of it, right? You can't let a bad apple just destroy a team. You need to fix it immediately. I had a high performer on the team who was disdainful of everybody's work. He was not collaborative. He was always gold plating and holding on to stuff instead of doing CI with the rest of the team.
Isolation, long-lived feature branches.
But he was a hotshot developer, but still dragging the team down.
But it was heroics, and it was creating.
It wasn't even heroics. It was just like, I'm better than you. Right? He was better than most of the team, technically, but it didn't matter because he harmed the team. The team overall didn't deliver as well with him on the team.
Actually, this is basically a topic of its own, somewhat important to talk about this. Maybe we should talk about this as a special topic one more time in the future, because this is a real. So when I look back into the past, most problems I saw personally were coming from exactly those things. So delayed projects, too many mistakes, people, missing teamwork. So many problems are rooted to exactly this. Missing transformations or failing transformations into a new type of engineering culture or methodology or practice, like CD, for example. That often fails, or TDD. It often fails because some do things, others don't, and you don't have, let's say, you don't have a common idea implemented. You don't have an example implemented. You don't have leaders. For example, I'm in several Slack groups, and people are often like, especially in scaling startups, you have that engineering leads ask, how can we measure our teams? Why? Because they try to, with measurements, with metrics, they try to fix exactly this problem. It's like they basically miss, let's say, team leads, good team leads who keep the teams together to, push them into the right direction, into the common alignment of the business. Instead, they try to do this with measurements, with individual metrics and all this kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, I would have been fired off that. I would have been fired off that team if they measured me on development metrics.
We have a question on this, by the way. I just checked, doing my due diligence. We have a question that didn't show up on StreamYard, and it's exactly about this topic. I would like to read it out loud if you don't mind. So Yuvraj is asking, software engineers will often treat any productivity metric as a problem to solve. Gaming it is sometimes just the path of least resistance, and sometimes it's the challenge of breaking a rule without being caught.
Yeah, I don't even think it's I agree that they will treat that as a problem to be solved. I think in most cases they're not trying to be bad actors. They're just trying to meet the expectation. You have to be very careful about setting incentives because people will align to the incentives. Right? Again, most people are not bad actors. They're just not. the outcomes you get are caused by the people creating the incentives, right? Going back to the 3 wrongs, right? I mean, those are 3 really good reasons to do continuous delivery. But the problems we're talking about right now about lack of teamwork, people hanging on to things, all of this dysfunction that slows down delivery and causes harm, CI helps fix that. You can't, it's the act of implementing continuous delivery is like lifting up the rug and shining a light and all the things have been swept under the rug. You can't hide dysfunction and do CD. You just can't, right? And so if you're pushing towards continuous delivery, what's going to filter out is high-performing teams.
Bryan,
and
since
high morale teams.
Since we're talking about high-performing and high-morale teams, you had a very good, and maybe this is just interesting to me because I like spreadsheets like this, but you had a very good, like this table on your actual blog post. This is from your original blog post that we linked earlier. Yeah. Is the high-performing team the one at the top? Like, do these columns here match the 3 wrongs? Is that?
Well, I mean, the goal of this is just to explain like complexity, right? Your odds of being correct are like 1 over like said, what is it? 1 over 2 to the raise to the nth number of people involved, right? So
everybody has to be right, and everybody has to be on time for the entire thing to be functional.
So we have 3 silos here, right? You've got the PMO, you've got the development team, and the testing team, right? Well, they all are going to have different mental models of what correct is. And this is not an assertion, by the way. I've measured this on multiple value streams when I was interacting with teams. Every time I saw an external testing team, instead of testing handled within the team, there was this triage loop. You'd have the testing team writing their test with the same requirements from the development team was writing code with, and then the test would fail. And you want to know the percentage of the time the test was correct and failing? It was like 40% of the time, right? And then you'd go back to a meeting that would take 2 or 3 hours to go and try to dig through the failures and identify who was incorrect. And then go back to the product owner only to find out both of them were incorrect. Of course, then you ship and find out that all 3 of them were incorrect. Right. I mean, so that just that handoff and delay of having those silos so impactful.
I often discuss this regarding, when one of the deliverables is a plan itself, when stakeholders are sort of trying to play this game of let's get the estimates right. And then, at the point where the estimates are wrong because we're late, then they try to have a second generation game of the same game where they say, okay, if we're wrong, how far along our original estimate are we right now? So they are playing like this second generation estimation game of, okay, if the estimation was off, but I think the plan was good, what do you estimate the current progress is?
That's like the dumb of Scrum Masters or somebody changing story points to make the burn down chart look good at the end of the sprint. I mean, it's just.
So what's the root cause here? How many steps back do we need to go to come to a person that has accidentally created such a system?
Well, I mean, this goes back to you need a cross-functional product team. If you're delivering product, you need a cross-functional product.
Our streams, let's say, have a little bit of an SMB startup focus. So if I'm sort of looking at a timeline of a startup, like let's say 2-3 years, I'm rolling it backwards. Did the CEO set up this culture? Did the CTO set up this culture? Like,
you start with day one. What this is the culture we want. So I belong to a startup now. I was I think there was 8 of us when we started. I started on day 1, right? And we started with we actually hire for culture. If you go to a job interview with Defense Unicorns, your first interview is going to be a culture interview. Are you a good cultural fit for our culture? And if not, hey, you might be for somebody else, right? I was talking to another CEO recently who has a startup that Kent Beck actually works for. It's kind of cool. they hire specifically for, do you know how to do test-driven development? You know, do you know how to do CI? I mean,
It's
they
very
hire,
controversial on LinkedIn, especially. People get super upset about it. It's like, don't price with the DD.
Hey,
What's your
if people
opinion
don't, my opinion on it is, I wish I was better at it. I'm always faster when I do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I didn't learn to do it from day one, so it's something that I practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I will generally, if I don't do it,
Mm-hmm.
I'll come back and go, God damn it, I wish I'd been doing TDD, because this would have been, now I'm going to go and do all this rework because I didn't.
Yeah.
That's my opinion on it, right? Anyway, they hire for their culture. This is because you start the way you want to end. This is just like the conversations that you guys were having yesterday, you know, about putting together a pipeline. And I said pipelines feature 0.
Yeah.
I was given a talk one time at a company about platform as a product, but somebody asked me about when's the right time to create a CD pipeline. I'm like, when's the right time to add linting to a JavaScript project? Your pipeline is just like the validation that everything's good, and your application will be shaped by the pipeline. It is the constraints that shapes your application. And if you try to bolt it on later, it's just, all it's going to do is say, look at all this tech debt that we didn't know about.
And then you also create this intergenerational problem of there was something created pre-pipeline and something was created post-pipeline, and now there's this disconnect.
But it's the same with an organization. If you're not intentional about your culture from day one, you can't bolt it on later.
This is what I often, refer to hidden strategic decisions. When you think you don't need to implement this in first place, may it be the culture, may it be, let's say, the right foundation, may it be the right destination. I hear this especially in startups. They say you can always fix later, right? You can always improve later.
I physically recoil from, we're a startup, we don't need a pipeline.
I hate this. I hate this when people saying this, because they don't know what it means to actually, get things reverted later on. It is so hard.
No, I mean, so like Defense Unicorns. I mean, the engineers at Defense Unicorns are intensely focused on: are we testing this correctly? Do we have a reliable pipeline to deliver this well? Yeah. And we've only been around for 2 years. We're pretty mature about that stuff, and we were pretty mature about that stuff on day one. Yeah. Right? It's so important.
But you're describing. So yesterday with Tobias as well. He mentioned the comment here. Teams need to have difficult conversations and bring up those conflicts and discuss them. Yeah. Not talking about the elephant in the room will lead to degraded trust and performance. For practical advice, how to have those conversations, I like the book Agile Conversations.
I totally agree. He's spot on. A team is, you spend more time with your team than you do with your family, and a lot of times. And if you can't allow toxicity to rot the team. Mm-hmm. It makes your daily work terrible. It just, if you can't find another job, it just sucks the joy out of your life. We do the work itself is so hard. We should at least have fun with our team while we do it. We should like each other. We should appreciate each other, respect each other.
Happy to see each other every day, right?
Yeah.
A reason to come on and fight those problems, because, as you said, you don't know what happens. You don't know what happens with your users, with the system, some circumstances, and you at least come along or get along with the people you work with. It is somewhat important, because this, over time you have those ups and downs, and a good team will push you up again when you are personally down again. And this is very important for the business as well. You need to run your teams on some point, like having this implemented culture in a way where, there's supportive culture actually. That people, when they see, something is not going well for you, they come and help you. And this is the same with code, with documentation, with working like, it must be a good fit for my colleagues, for example. So when I write something, when I write a test, when I plan some work, I have in mind, how can I do that for others? that they are happy with that this is a good thing for them to learn, for them to improve. How can I make the life easier for my colleagues? And this is a mature way of working. If you are not doing this, you are actually not a team player. You are not part of the team. You are just there by contract. This is an important differentiation. So this is what I actually learned the hard way. And
I'm gonna take that up a level because this platform engineering is the thing I'm very passionate about. For that exact reason, how can I build platforms to make my coworkers' jobs easier, remove friction? So many platform teams act like police, or they just don't care about their customers, their colleagues. But I talked to a developer at ExxonMobil several years ago, and he was in platform. He said, I've discovered that it seems like all the top developers wind up in platforms so they can be closer to their customers. Right? You have to, so I'm just going to throw that out there. If you're doing platform engineering and you're not intensely focused on making somebody else's job easier rather than your own, quit.
Good advice.
Thank you, Tobias, and thank you, Bryan and Adrian, on this topic, because James is sort of course correcting us a little bit here. So I think the 4 key metrics are a good set of metrics to reflect the overall performance capability, because we just spoke about, how do we make work suck less, or how do we make at least work be more enjoyable for others? Yeah. And I think it ties in well to the performance.
I would quickly say something about that. I know that not everyone is. I heard that quite often, but for me, the metrics are like a speedometer. And if your car is not driving, you don't need a speedometer. It is like, how can you tweak things? Metrics are about tweaking. It is a further step. First thing, what most teams fail, what I see, is to lay the foundation, the groundwork. And you can't use metrics to build a groundwork.
It has to be the biggest problem.
So in the 2021 IT Revolution Spring Journal, you can find an article I wrote called How to Misuse and Abuse DORA Metrics. I'm going to disagree with you here slightly, James. I think they're really good metrics to indicate that there's a problem. They're not a good way to indicate that things are going well. And they don't tell you anything about what to fix, but they are. And the car example I would use isn't a speedometer; it's a check engine light is the example I would use. Right? Something's broken.
Something's broken, and the human needs to assess whether you need to fix.
Not only that, but something's broken contextually to this particular team, because. Every team is delivering to a different context with a different set of constraints, ultimately.
Very good point.
So they're good for that. There's many other metrics I would use to identify what's broken, right? And there's other metrics I would use to discover if things are going well, but those are business value metrics. I mean, that's, those aren't related to engineering as so much as outcome.
Steve mentions this as well. Raul mentions it, but out the pipeline is like selling clothes naked. It's a good analogy. Thank you, Raul. Thanks for being with us. Steve mentions also a fresh face. You can't bolt culture on later, 100%. If you think you can add culture, you have underestimated the work involved in sustaining culture.
Culture has to be intentional. This is something I learned. It got drilled into your head at Walmart. If you've been at Walmart for any length of time, you're going to live the Walmart culture. It's taught to you during orientation. It's drilled. It's printed up on the walls. It's taken very seriously. I had to change the way I talked when I joined Walmart because of the culture. I couldn't cuss anymore. Right? People take things like respect for the individual so seriously that a VP can get fired for screaming at like an individual contributor. Right? So you have to be intentional about the culture if you want to maintain it. You can't just say, "Oh, this is our culture," and then not live it.
Yeah,
just text on the wall.
I would even say that you can compare the culture of your company or team with if you have a garden, for example. If you don't, put ongoing work into that,
the weeds will grow.
Basically, it will. I don't know. It will basically not be as intended. So it will maybe die on some cases. You will have problems here and there. Some things may stay up, something may go down. And you need to take ongoing, attention, every day. You need to walk through your garden, and be there. It is not, you can't do that remotely, It's like you need to be in there, take a look and feel how it's going on. This is basically the same with humans. You need to be, let's say, between them. And this is an interesting point. What Sophia just said.
Would you mind reading it out?
Yeah, of course. A very interesting discussion on culture. What if you are on a place that doesn't have a engineering culture? Is there a way to start creating and spreading it? Which steps do you advise to build it? Support from top management. I would pass the word to Bryan. Just wanted to say that you always have a culture in place. It is just, do you have a good culture or a bad culture in place?
Is it deliberate?
That's true. You do have a culture. That's for sure. Yeah. No, but this one actually is near and dear to my heart, this particular question, because we had a business culture when I joined Walmart. That we had the first CIO said that, everyone's a merchant. Everyone in IT is a merchant, right? And we didn't really have an engineering culture. When I joined the platform area, it was the very first time we were trying to centralize delivery platforms. So it wasn't just the nice way to say it's federated. I think federated is a little more structured than what we had. But we were trying to centralize the platform. But the goal of centralizing the platform was to build a platform that encouraged continuous delivery for two reasons. One, to improve our ability to deliver business value, but also to improve our engineering culture. But the platform's not enough, right? There's other things that we did. We created special interest groups around continuous delivery, around testing, around different things to bring interested engineers together, and also to bring in other people who are being exposed to these things for the first time to grow that engineering culture. We created the dojo to work hand in hand with teams, but also to be advocates for for continuous delivery and this culture of engineering. We did lunch and learns, all sorts of things, DevOps days, focused on how do we deliver business value better, put challenging problems. When Randy gave us this really hard problem, hey, we need you to deliver this more often than once a quarter, we had to elevate our engineering culture to get it done. So if you want to, engineering culture is an outcome of trying to solve really hard engineering problems and working together as an organization. Hey, how do we engineer better to solve these business problems better? And that's the approach I would take, because engineering culture without focus on business is pointless. But focusing on why can't we solve this business problem and then do it with engineering. I was just reading a draft paper by Gary Groover. And if you don't know who Gary Groover is, I would Google Gary Groover HP LaserJet. Gary's an amazing guy. But they took the same approach at HP. They weren't trying to improve engineering culture. They were just trying to improve business delivery and their ability to sell printers. And it elevated the engineering culture because they had to solve really hard engineering problems. And then what they did was like, we don't know how to solve this problem. You're the engineers. Please solve this problem.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like engineering culture is an output of those decisions, of those questions.
I think culture's always an outcome. Right? I mean, you can hire for the right culture and you can say, we want this culture to behave this way. But if you can change culture if you change behavior. Mm-hmm. Right? So yeah, I think engineering culture is the outcome of trying to solve really hard problems, and that's been my experience anyway.
But getting from that is basically impossible to change culture if you can't change behavior of the people.
Yeah.
So at some point you might need to make hard decisions.
Yeah.
We're in our last 15 minutes of the show. I would like to ask anybody who has a last question for Bryan or for the panel to post them now, if you have any other comments. Otherwise, we can wrap up slowly. Any topic that, Bryan, you think we should cover before we close? We have a few more questions, but I want to sort of gauge the temperature here with you. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. No, I mean, just going back to that blog post, I mean, the reason I wrote that, I'm always trying to because I know the positive impact that working this way has on teams, on businesses. It's been my experience that I need to figure out different ways to communicate to different personas about why this is so important, right?
Yeah.
And
Kent Beck has said something similar recently. I spoke to him a few weeks ago for the first time on a founders call. He keeps reiterating, and it keeps getting lost in the weeds, because it's not about X unit. Like he keeps mentioning, he keeps repeating now, after 20, 30 years, that TDD is a methodology to manage your anxiety, to not understanding what it is you're building. And that's the important part. It's managing that anxiety.
No, and people get lost in the weeds. All this, I talk you should only be using trunk-based development, just full stop. But trunk-based development's not the point. Trunk-based development is the tool that you need to use to get to the point, which is rapid feedback, right? The problem is that the requirements are wrong, and we're going to misunderstand them, or they're going to change before we can deliver. And if you can make your system more efficient, and you can drop the cost of change, you can afford to run experiments. You can get feedback on smaller things before you invest too much. You can get a higher level of confidence that, number one, it's not going to break, and number two, it's the right solution, right? It's just all the agile industrial complex crap about how to Scrum better. I don't care. Number one, most people, oh, we're going to do Scrum, we should deliver every 2 weeks. The Agile Manifesto was written 23 years ago, and 2 weeks was really fast back then. I was delivering 5 to 10 times a day in 2016. Come on, level up, right? Yeah. To production, not to some staging environment, to actual users using my stuff in distribution centers. It cost a lot of money when they went down.
Ultimately, what keeps getting misconstrued is that Agile is not a management process. Agile is a process that takes away guesswork out of the sort of the pipeline that we are professionals. We are doing engineering. We want to actually produce something that touches the real world, and we want data from the real world so that we correct what we're doing and how we're doing it. That's the whole point.
The whole point, yes, the whole point is to deliver more of the right thing, less of the wrong thing. And the only way we can do that is to find out, right? Yeah. You can't test better to get there.
In isolation, especially, in like a fake environment that is...
Tests only tell you what you think you know. Yeah. Production tells you reality. And then you adjust the test to match production.
Exactly.
The test for test is prod, right? Yeah. Ship it and find out.
Yeah.
I would like to show this one real quick, because this is pretty interesting, where people always make these distinctions between enterprises, startups, traditional small to medium-sized businesses. Bryan, what is your experience? But what differences are there between small, medium-sized, and enterprises when it comes to cultures?
Yeah.
Well, let's see. So my experience so far is that large enterprises are actually a whole bunch of medium-sized or small businesses. So, that's like, I tell people, yeah, we were doing continuous delivery at Walmart. Well, that means, or if you go to any conference where they're talking about DevOps or CD or things, and they're talking large enterprise, the whole enterprise is not doing that, right? I mean, there's segments of the enterprise that are seeing success working this way. That's what they're saying. That's what I was saying. It's just better, right? That's just the reality, is that the culture, you like I said, at Walmart, you have this overriding thing, but if one VP or one director was not following that culture, that their area was going to be following the culture that they were leading, right? It was up to everybody to hold everybody accountable, or you wind up with this fractured culture where some area go, no, this is a culture we want, or it would just wind up that way, right? I don't think that's really the difference, is that you can have people talking about it, but ultimately you're just left with a whole bunch of small and medium-sized businesses, in my opinion, unless you're very, very small. it's really easy to have the right culture in a business where the whole business is the size of a team.
Sometimes I have this idea that enterprises, with the idea of DevOps, and when we read about DevOps, the definition of DevOps, they actually try to get, let's say, teams into smaller units again to make them more manageable. So is it like that actually a small business isn't that far away from enterprise teams, let's say? Let's say you have a small business who's actually reflecting what should be a DevOps team within a company, a larger company. Is there some truth?
No, I would agree. I mean, that was like I said, like in logistics, that was step number one, was to get down to relatively small teams. They were still too big, but I'm talking, anywhere from 12 to 15 people. Actually, when I joined, that's the size of a team, because that's about as many as a manager can manage. It was about 12 to 15 people, right? But that's at least what I've seen, is that you wind up with all these small teams. And then you've got team cultures, which you can roll up to whatever that's being incentivized by their direct leadership or their leader, depending how many levels you have. It's generally not whatever's being incentivized by the CTO, because it's too distant.
And oftentimes I also see in these kinds of companies that are growing vertically and laterally, sometimes the teams separate themselves on purpose to perhaps pursue a different culture than, perhaps we would have a more bureaucratic system in an older part of the company, but you need to run some kind of new experiment against a different part of the market, or at least a different demographic on the market.
Yeah, and as a leader, it's really important to keep an eye on it and make sure that culture doesn't become toxic.
Exactly.
Because I've seen that as well, where a team will be spun up to go and do some adventurous new thing, right, out of a hack that they won on a hack day. And they go off and do a thing, but then they completely isolate them from everybody else. Because we're the special people. And instead of learning things to bring back, they just became this toxic little island over here that was their own special club, right? They had the wrong attitude. And so as a leader, you just have to keep track and make sure that everybody is marching towards the common organizational goals, and that people are still cross-pollinating, helping each other. Like in Defense Unicorns, we cross-pollinate all the time. We have very intentional, random meetings of people just to have coffee together for half an hour and chat about not work.
Yeah.
So you're always talking to people that you don't work with every day.
Good. So I don't know who this is, because I don't see the comment on LinkedIn, but actually this is an agreement, and mentioned that I just read it. People get lost in the weeds to all of this. This is why the sentiments of "we need more engineering rigor" resonates with me. It's also something Dave Farley emphasizes in his book Modern Software Engineering, which is true. It may be a good recommendation to read. So there's a lot of true things about this, and good things about the conversation we had today in this book as well.
I think if you look in the front, I may have, because Dave sent me a pre-production copy of that, and my response was that this should be required reading for everybody graduating with a software degree, and you shouldn't be able to graduate without reading this book. Basically, it's such a good book. I can't recommend, and it's one of the most important books I've seen in the last decade.
Are there any other book recommendations, Bryan? Because we do get a lot of questions every week. If I want to dig more, if I don't want to watch the stream all the time and just sit down with a book and learn something very practical.
So it depends on your persona, right? So if you're a software developer, I would also read Accelerate. Especially Appendix A of Accelerate. If you are trying to lead development teams, I think Jonathan Smart's Sooner, Safer, Happier is a really, really good book. Team Topologies, if you are a senior engineer trying to help organize a larger product effort at Team Topologies or manager, anybody senior enough to say, hey, we're trying to structure something larger than the team. Team Topologies, I think, is a really, really good book. I'll say that we didn't have any of these books when we were trying to do this for the first time. I'm just happy that Team Topologies came out and reflected our experience when we did it. It's like, oh, we were doing it correctly. Awesome.
But even though you didn't read it, you had an important enough problem and a high enough budget to go out and say, we need to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You got to support the business or you're going to go out. Yeah. I think those two books are really, really good. If you're a software developer, read the Unicorn Project, and if you're an engineering manager, read the Phoenix Project.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any advice that you've learned? You said you're in the industry, to maybe close up on this idea. You've been in the industry for 30 years. Is there any advice that you had to unlearn that is no longer relevant?
Oh, yeah. Number one, tech leads can't be dictators. I used to be a dictatorial tech lead. I'm now one of the last people to talk generally when we're having a discussion as a team. I'm trying to guide the conversation, and I will always. I used to be, hey, here's my solution. Now it's like, well, if your solution and my solution are equal, I'm going to choose yours. Right. I had to really unlearn that behavior to deliver at a higher level. Right. I had to learn how to be much more collaborative for us to ship. Absolutely unlearning feature complete before I deliver. Had to unlearn that. That's a big one. I should have this test ready to deliver at any moment. Passing test, one small thing that should be always deliverable. Committing like 3 or 4 days from now, all of those things. And I'll tell you that Gary Groover saved me from trying to implement Git flow and logistics at Walmart because we had random branching. I'd never heard of trunk-based development at the time. I was put in charge of the team that was responsible for merging 400 branches every quarter. And I was trying to bring some structure to it. And so I found Git flow. I was like, oh, this will work. And then just before I started writing up and pushing that way, I met Gary and he told me I was wrong. And I told him he was wrong. And he gave me evidence that I was wrong. And I was wrong. And so, yeah. And then later on, I asked Vincent to please fix his blog post because I was having too many arguments internally because other people had the same opinion I'd had originally. And they can't do CD that way. And Vincent fixed his blog post somewhat.
Sounds like you dodged the bullet.
I did. I dodged the bullet. Gary's never allowed to buy beer around me anytime I'm around him.
So, last 4.5 minutes.
Yeah, we have a little bit of time. What do you want to do? We're on time.
But you always come so late to your book club, so maybe you should take this into consideration. He's the only one who's not on his book club when he starts.
Now, I tell you, people underestimate the importance of Accelerate. But I think it's
we're reading Accelerate on the book club right now.
Yeah, no, that's why I was mentioning it. I think the core problem with that is it's been boiled down to the 4 key metrics. And number one, they were survey results. Mm-hmm. The questions were relatively vague about things like, organization. Was that team? Was it your entire company? Are you talking about 1,000 developers? Are you talking about 10? Mm-hmm. Right? And they're not the point. Judging yourself against those is a terrible idea. Mm-hmm. Judge yourself against the ability to deliver business value, at a lower cost, more frequently, to get faster feedback. And that's what, and with more stability, more security, higher levels of compliance. Judge your ability to do that. Right? Mm-hmm. Read Appendix A. Look at minimumcd.org. Look at minimumcd.org. These are things put together. It's like these are problems. If you solve these, you'll be able to do that. Right? Just stop with focusing on door metrics. They're useful, but not for what people use them for.
Yeah, the 4 key metrics are very are very shallow in what use the of what practical actions they sort of enable you, because you need to have exactly those problems that those 4 key metrics are measuring.
Well, you don't. I mean, everybody has those 4 problems, but you have to already understand
Yes.
what they're telling you for them to be useful.
And that has to be your current next priority. Like that has to be the next biggest.
They are for tweaking, for increasing the performance on a higher level, but they are not there to creating the foundation. It's very important to understand.
Exactly.
Right? Oh, great. So I would say we had a very good session today. It was great. So I just saw that most people stood with us, very interested. So we've got a lot of feedback. We will write about this, right? And we will we will go through the transcription. We will create clips out of that. We will basically process on the content in the next days, and go into some of those topics a little deeper then. So you feel free to participate on those as well. And yes, so Bryan, was it a good, interesting session for you as well?
It was. I appreciate the opportunity to share my perspective on this. I think sometimes my views on this don't come out as clearly with words, like a written form than they do this way. But no, I appreciate the time.
I'm sure many people appreciated your appearance today, just because your input is actually, let's say, it is somewhat influential and important for people, and many more people should follow your advices. Just saying that out loud now, because there are so many people out there still ignoring that, and that's not good.
Yeah, and I'd like to be very clear about this. My goal is that we should all be living better lives as developers, and we should all be delivering better business value and be able to spend more time with our kids and more time having hobbies and less time stressing over work. Right? I mean, that's my goal. I'm not trying to be influential. I just want people I just want the work to suck less.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Bryan.
40 more seconds.
And Adrian as well. Thank you so much for this conversation, for being on the show. Thank you for everybody joining us live in chat. Again, you ran the show for most of it, and that's the point. This is supposed to be like a mini conference, and I always appreciate when there's people in the audience starting a discussion with each other, and then we can sort of chime into that, sort of take a peek and respond to them directly, sort of face to face in first person, rather than commenting it sort of after the fact. So this is a huge vote of confidence, and also gives Adrian and I more energy to sort of know that we're
and honestly, I enjoy talking about this stuff. I always answer DMs.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the best way to reach out to you if somebody would like to continue this conversation?
If you don't know me, LinkedIn is the best way to reach me. I get behind on emails. Email's not the best way. If you do know me, you have my phone number. So.
Perfect. So with that, thank you so much. This was amazing. Any last words?
You guys.
Yes, and everyone have a nice evening or day, depending on the time zone, and see you next Wednesday then. So goodbye, everyone. Goodbye, Bryan. Goodbye, audience. Goodbye. Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We will announce the next topics in the following days. Until then, enjoy. Thank you so much. Ciao.